Well, welcome everyone to this panel, Developing Global Citizenship and Career Competencies through Area Studies and Languages. We would like to thank all of our panelists for today. And I would like to begin by presenting myself. My name is Juan Rodriguez. I'm the co-director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center, and we are very pleased to have this robust group of panelists and experts in this day sharing perspectives on global studies. And today we're here to discuss the impact that global citizenship is having as a concept in area studies. We have experts from Middle East studies, Africana studies, and Latin American studies who are going to discuss strategies for using area and language studies to develop students' identities as engaged global citizens. Panelists shared ideas for strengthening the connections between area studies and future careers, and for embedding essential career skills into programs and courses. The audience will discover innovative approaches to the teaching of area and interdisciplinary studies that enhance student success and career opportunities. One of the things that I would like to bring to consideration as we move into the panel is that this concept of global citizenship and global citizenship education, it's about nurturing respect for all and building a sense of belonging to a common humanity. But how does that plays out when we also have to take into consideration different contexts? We have to take into consideration global inequities, histories that are very diverse, and also that have a wide range of aspects to consider. So with that in mind, I would like to begin by presenting our panelists. We have Dr. Nurudeen B. Akinyemi, Director of the Center for Africana Studies at Kennesaw State University. Dr. Alix Pierre, African Diaspora and the World, Senior Lecturer and Resident Scholar, Diaspora by Cultural Incubator at Spelman College. Dr. Anastasia Valecce, Associate Professor of Hispanic Studies, Department of World Languages and Cultures, Spelman College. Dr. Kelly Comfort, Professor of Spanish, Director of Undergrad Studies and the Salud in Spain Global at Home Program, School of Modern Languages, Georgia Tech. We have Dr. Miguel Rosas Buendia, Assistant Professor of Spanish, School of Modern Languages, Georgia Tech. Dr. Natalie Khazaal, Associate Professor of Arabic, Director of the Arabic and Middle East and North Africa Programs, School of Modern Languages, Georgia Tech. And Dr. Ian Campbell, Professor of Arabic and Comparative Literature, Director of Graduate Studies, Department of World Languages and Cultures at Georgia State University. So we will begin our panel with some brief presentations from our panelists. If you would like to say a couple of words about your programs and the scope of your programs, that will be welcome.
Okay, hi, I'm Ian Campbell. I run Arabic here at Georgia State, and I've done it pretty much solo ever since the pandemic started and I lost my PTIs. When I do area studies within Arabic language courses, it's been integrated into the curriculum for a really long time, that we don't just learn reading, writing, speaking, and listening. We learn about culture as well. And an essential feature about learning about cultures is to understand how different cultures have different frameworks for understanding certain things. So I wouldn't necessarily have framed it as global citizenship per se until I started interacting with this panel idea. I've always thought about it as making American students understand that they're weird. And weird here is an acronym. This comes from 2010 originally. Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And there are problematics with using this framework that especially it's been critiqued a lot recently. So I'm just going to put that aside for now because this is a very short presentation. But what I try to make students understand is that Americans and people from closely related countries are exceptional, not in the Trumpian sense of American exceptionalism, but rather in the sense of being often profoundly unrepresentative of world cultures as a whole. That Western, sometimes white instead of Western is what the W stands for. This acronym has been played with any number of times. It's not to say that people from other cultures can't be educated, industrialized, rich, or democratic. It's just that the confluence of frameworks that applies to Western college students here in America, Western Europe, Canada, Australia, places like that, tend to not reflect a majority of world cultures. So, for example, when we're studying Arabic, one of the things we learn is vocabulary surrounding families. And what I'll do is have students say, I'll ask the question to students, how many of your first cousins do you talk to on a monthly basis? And my answer to this is I have 8 first cousins, and there's only one that I would actually recognize if I bumped into at the airport, because we're just spread out. We don't have that much in common. 3 of them voted for Trump twice. Yeah, I know. And so we don't really talk that much and don't have close relationships. And Arab people find this universally appalling and want to know, what is my problem that I don't, interact with my cousins like this? That I'm weird. And I'm like, well, yes, I am weird in this acronymic sense. I'm kind of weird normally too, but never mind. And so what I have to do is introduce to students that tropes that are common in Western culture, for example, people having not necessarily abusive but domineering parents and just deciding to go low contact or no contact with them, that just doesn't fly in Arab culture. It's not going to work. It's almost unthinkable in a way that you would do something like this. If you owned a successful business and you were expanding it to, let's say, I don't know, a dry cleaners, and you were going to open a second store, well, who do you get to manage that store? And the American students will universally say, like, well, you put an ad out on LinkedIn and you find somebody with experience running a dry cleaners and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, you're in a different world now. You're the weirdo. You have to get your brother to manage the store. And the students will be like, well, what if your brother's a drunk, or he's just a bad manager, or you just don't like him very much? And I'm like, that doesn't matter. This is how we fly here. And this is what you have to do. And so, talking about democratic, a lot of these countries are putative democracies like the USA. And so people from the Arab world had a really understanding attitude toward what happened when Trump took over. Like, oh, look, authoritarian strongman. Yeah, we're used to that. So there are a lot of cultural preconceptions embedded in being an American college student that don't always apply to every college student. People from different backgrounds, especially recent immigrant backgrounds here in the USA, of which I get a lot of students, tend to have a more nuanced view of this than people whose families have been in the States for 3 or more generations. And then shifting gears here, so I explain to students that they're weird, and then I have to talk to them about etiquette and protocol. So in America, your authenticity as a person is determined by your willingness to ignore or forego protocol. I want my students to call me Ian. They don't have to call me Dr. Campbell. That's my dad. When my daughter was an infant, I took her to the daycare center here at campus. And then president of the university, Mark Becker, used to park right next to where you park to drop off your kid at daycare. And so one day I was getting wiggly toddler out of the car, and he was like, oh, hey, she's a cutie. Hey, hi, I'm Mark. And introduced himself. Oh, hi, I'm Ian. And I'm like, in the Arab world, your authenticity as a person is determined by your willingness to engage properly in protocol. So the president of the university is never going to talk to me, a then lowly assistant professor, not even to me as a full professor now. If my students come to my office, they have to be formally greeted. We have to engage in the rituals of protocol and greeting and so forth, because that's how your authenticity as a person is determined. If you walk into a coffee house and you see 3 of your friends there, here in the States, you're going to be like, yo, or maybe insult them or something like that because they're your close friends. But in the Arab world, you have to walk over and you have to shake each one's hand and say hello and greet them and ask about their family, or they're going to think you're mad at them. So you have to be willing to understand that protocol is important in a way, important in Arabic culture in a way that it just isn't here in the USA. So we have to practice these things. They have to come to my office and formally introduce themselves, and we have to shake hands and so forth. Personally, inside, I'm kind of dying because I want them to call me Ian, not Dr. Campbell. But part of learning another language is to learn to be a citizen of that culture as well. So those are some of the things we talk about, and I don't want to belabor it further, so I'll pass it on to Natalie.
Thank you, Ian. That was really interesting, and I really enjoyed your approach to, how to train the students, I guess, to understand the differences in the cultures. Before coming to Georgia Tech, I've taught in a department called International Studies, and we thought a lot about global citizenship and how we can bring it to languages, to modern languages, to teaching, and to all sorts of cultural classes. So when I think of global citizenship education, I think of what is citizenship, which is, like rights and responsibilities of that individual, of the person. When I think about global, it's on a global scale, but it involves, for now, only the human species. And I find this concept to be something that we need to transcend. We need to think about we need to think about planetary citizenship education rather than just global, which is kind of speciesist and very focused on humans. We need to think of the planet. And then the third aspect is education, which is something that we hope to be transformative for the students. We hope that it will address common concerns and problems and issues that the whole planet is dealing with, inequalities, climate change, other anxieties that are very conspicuous these days. And we also need to kind of, through education, have the students experience a transformative change in them that comes from critical thinking, from feeling, connecting emotionally, and also from doing something about it. And in other words, we take the traditional education of reading, writing, math, make it transformative for the students, but at the same time, it's also like an education with a moral consciousness. So that's how I think about, I would call planetary citizenship education. This concept has really made a big change on how I envision my own classes, and how, when I do the curriculum and design syllabi, I always tend to think through these issues. In Arabic, Arabic is a critical language. It's one of the 6 global languages. It is extremely important culturally in the whole world. It was the birthplace of the alphabet. It's the birthplace of algebra. It's the birthplace of the concept of university institution, of universities. So in terms of education, extremely important. However, we have generations and generations of people in the West trained by Hollywood that Arab culture produces terrorists. So what do we do in the classes so that we can turn this around and have students have this transformational experience and see a different, side of that? So basically, for example, in a class that I teach, which is called Arab History on Film, it's a kind of Arab cinema class, to help the students, acquire some of these transformative experiences and new ways of thinking about their own role. I compile movies not just from Hollywood that have to do with Arab history or just from the Arab region, but movies from everywhere in the world, including from Mexico, including from Scandinavian countries, from Israel, from France. All of these movies, if they talk about Arab history, I include them in that. And so the students start understanding that one single event can be portrayed in multiple different perspectives. And so they start, thinking more critically of what Hollywood tells them, and they start noticing things, which is really what the intention behind that education is. I had one student who told me, I've never actually noticed that the initial song of the Disney movie Aladdin has the lyrics saying, what can you do? It's a place where they cut off your hand if they don't like your face, but hey, it's home. I never noticed how racist this Disney movie is before I took this class. And now I just can't watch any Hollywood movie without thinking through these perspectives. So it is really important to basically create these experiences for our students. But our students are not bystanders. If the issues and concerns that come from the area, from the Arab region, with Islamophobia and the influence of Hollywood, I can take to shape the curriculum for the class. The students also help me shape the curriculum. At first, I taught this class, just compiling the movies that were available and that we could get our hands on. But some of them, actually a lot of them were about wars, which is sad since, a lot of us are concerned with other things as well. But the students started talking about how important it is to bring in the perspective of the U.S. Army. And so the next time I taught the class, I actually put this in the title, added and the U.S. military, and I got 6 times more students to enroll in the class. So they are kind of shaping, the agenda as well. So what other transformational experiences can we foster through language learning? I'm a big believer in project-based learning. This is, a kind of a project that goes through the whole class, and the students produce deliverables at the end. And I've organized a lot of my classes, language classes including, to be based in this long-term one-semester project. I'll give you 2 examples. So one is in a class called Business Arabic. It's an advanced level class, and basically the students throughout the semester develop an advertising campaign where they advertise our university, Georgia Tech, to Lebanese high school students with the intention that these high school students may apply, and if they're accepted, enroll in the university. So raising, the name of the university. While they're doing that, they're learning so much about Lebanon, an Arab country, about how a different person from a different country might think about their own country, how to advertise, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And basically also maybe learning about Georgia Tech and Atlanta, things that they never noticed. And so this cultural kind of exchange almost of ideas is important. And they create deliverables that are that could be used in our own advertising. They create a multimedia website. They create a podcast of interviews with Arab students from Georgia Tech to showcase their experiences. They create brochures. They create small promo videos, etc. The second class is a class that, a class on Arab media that I teach. Am I over my time? Okay, a class on Arab media that I teach, and again, it's a advanced level Arabic class, fully in Arabic, and basically this class poses the question: do satellite channels like Al Jazeera, and if you think about other languages, maybe Telemundo, and satellite channels, do they prevent Arab immigrants to the Atlanta area from integrating into the local community or not? This is a legitimate question that is of concern of many, including in the academic community. So the students, conduct a series of interviews with Arab immigrants in this area, ask them a bunch of questions, and then they produce a series of podcasts with their findings. While in the beginning, we also read some of the literature on their level, that I've, created on their level. So basically these projects relate that experience, while at the same time they always have to think about multiple perspectives and shifting, thinking from one perspective as the interviewer, then from another perspective, and then how do they actually answer this question that has relevance, to the community, but also academically. And I want to just end up with the last thing. So these are the advanced levels, but I also bring in these kind of like perspectives and shifting and encourage students' curiosity in my lower level classes. For example, in the intermediate class that I teach at Georgia Tech, I always bring an object. Almost every class, I bring a different object. And I brought a bunch of them here. For instance, this one, or this one, or this one, or this one. And I ask them in the beginning of each class, before they start, they have like about a few minutes, what's this and how do we use it? And so they have to discuss, in Arabic, and then come up with sometimes crazy ideas how to use that or that. Sometimes very close ideas, like this one, they kind of like almost got what it is. And then I teach them the word in Arabic, and then we teach them how like it's actually used. They watch a video. Their curiosity really, starts, the gears start turning in, or is it turning in? Turning in, yeah. And like really, they kind of are eager for what's the next object? What, like, wow. And maybe thinking about, do I have objects in my culture that, if I go abroad, can I bring an object and make it, the focus of the discussion? I guess I'll end up here, and if I have more. Did you want to add more?
I just wanted to say now I'm going to look around my office for objects. But what I really wanted to say was that the wiggly toddler I was talking about before is now an anarchist 14-year-old who's profoundly angry with Arabic culture for having invented algebra.
That was incredible. I don't know how you follow that up. My name is Akinyemi. I'm from Kennesaw State University. I'm director of our Center for Africana Studies. And just a little context, I'm also a political scientist. I used to teach courses in developing areas, comparative politics, and I also used to coordinate our academic program in African and African Diaspora Studies before I became director of the Center for Africana Studies. And I've always approached African studies as an interdisciplinary field, because there is no way you can teach African studies from just one disciplinary perspective. So sometimes my students don't know if I'm a geographer or a historian, because I'm always using maps and talking history and all of that. So my current position as Director of Africana Studies allows me to really go outside of my disciplinary boundaries and talk about Africa and the African diaspora. We don't offer degree program at the center. That degree program is in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, while the center is part of the Global Education Division. And you've met some of my colleagues here this morning. Seneca, who was on the earlier panel, is currently coordinator of the academic degree program in African and African Diaspora Studies. What the center allows me to do is to work with colleagues from across the university. It allows me to do something I'm really passionate about. And that is emphasizing the fact that African studies can be taught from any disciplinary background. So when we do programming, we're looking at how does that particular theme bring in colleagues from the sciences, from business, from public health, also working with colleagues in Latin American studies and Middle East studies. Because when you talk about the African diaspora, either in terms of the historical diaspora or contemporary diaspora, you're really talking about world issues because we're everywhere, right? So it forces you to really approach this, African diaspora discipline from multiple disciplinary backgrounds. So when we do our conference on human rights, we're bringing in colleagues from all over the place. When we do issues on immigration, for example, and students are asking questions about why are Africans trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe and dying in the Mediterranean. And then that allows us to talk about immigration globally and refugee issues globally. And that it's not just Africans. Well, look at where people are coming from. They're coming mainly from the global south, from the Middle East, from Asia. Now, see how they're being treated compared to where refugees are coming from in the global north. For example, Ukraine. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think immigrants from Latin America, from Africa and Asia are treated differently from immigrants coming from Europe? So that allows us also not only to situate Africa in the global south, but the global south within this broader discussion of global affairs, right? Being in Atlanta is a perfect place for a program on African and African diaspora studies because it allows us also to work with the African diaspora and the community. So we do an annual teaching workshop for local middle and high school students on Africa and the African diaspora. And we put this curriculum together with colleagues from business, from public health, from history, geography, to demonstrate to the teachers that you don't have to teach African issues only in social studies, that you can teach it across the curriculum, right? We've worked with the Haitian consulate here in Atlanta in doing a mentoring weekend for Haitian students or students from Haitian background in middle and high school. We've worked with the Brazilian consulate here and the Nigerian consulate. We have partnerships in Africa, Latin America, and we are working on one right now in Brazil. So when we're talking about Africa and the African diaspora, we're really talking about not just interdisciplinary, but really on a global scale. And that allows me to, have conversations with colleagues from, multiple disciplines. We do a study abroad program in Ghana. I have colleagues who do one in Uganda that's focused on public health. We've done virtual collaboration between students at Kennesaw State and students at Khazaal University in Morocco. And looking at female leadership in politics and in business, right? So the center really allows us to work with colleagues across the university. The Atlanta Global Center that you guys have here, I think it's wonderful. I want to steal that model and see how we can do a consortium, a Georgia Consortium for African Studies, to bring together these programs from across Georgia. Because when I try to do, well, right now we're trying to work on a festival that we do every year. We call it African Diaspora Festival. And this year we're calling it Ties That Bind. And we're trying to invite colleagues from across the university system. And I have my student assistant go online, get me information on these programs across the system, who is leading them. This is something that I should have all of this stuff in front of me, that I can just send out an email, but we don't have that structure here for Africana Studies. Right? We need to do more in terms of collaboration, joint grant writing, sponsoring study abroad programs, doing research together on Africa, but also on the African diaspora. But I'm going to stop there, and hopefully when we have this discussion, a lot of the stuff that I have down here we'll be able to discuss. But it's just a very brief introduction of who I am and what I do. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alix Pierre, and I teach in the African Diaspora in the World program at Spelman. And, this week as I was teaching and discussing with my students liberation movements and anti-colonial struggles in Africa and the world, and we had 3 documents to consider. Haile Selassie's What Life Has Taught Me, this short speech. Malcolm X's not just an American problem, but a world problem, and the documentary concerning violence. It dawned on me that, what X says is a perfect, definition of global citizenship. And I'd like to share with you the quote that, on which I call my students' attention. They read the document, but I really felt the need to help them understand what he had to say in terms of, and mind you, this was delivered in 1968, and this is what he had to say. And I quote, "And my reason for being here," he delivered this, this address in New York, is to discuss the Black Revolution that is going on, that is taking place on this earth, the manner in which it is taking place on the African continent, and the impact it's having in Black communities, not only here in America, but in England, in France, and in other of the former colonial powers today. In order for you and me, his audience, to know the nature of the struggle that you and I are involved in, we have to not only know the various ingredients involved at the local and national level, but also the ingredients that are involved at the international level. And that the problem of the Black man here in this country today, again, remember 1968, has ceased to be a problem of just the American Negro or an American problem. It has become a problem that's so complex and has so many implications in it that you have to study it in the world context or in its international context to really see it, as it is actually, or it actually is. Otherwise, you cannot even follow the local issue unless you know what part it plays in the entire international context. And when you look at it in that context, you see it in a different light, but you see it with more clarity. And to me, so I brought, really to the attention of the students the fact that this is really what global, citizenship, if you will, and understanding, knowledge, awareness is all about. I highlighted the 2 key points that X brings to the front. Number 1, the interconnectedness of events, and number 2, the importance or impact of geopolitics on events or occurrences. I made it clear to students that the reason X, had such a good grasp of, what was happening not only in the U.S. but in the world is because he was a, avid reader. But also the fact that he traveled. He traveled extensively, starting with, doing the pilgrimage to Mecca. And while he was in the region, he decided to expand, and he went to Kenya, he visited Ghana. The list is long: Ethiopia, Zanzibar, so forth, and so on. And the African Diaspora and the World program, was started at Spelman by a group of professors, and one of them is here, Dr. McCurda, with the desire to offer young African-American students, and female students at that, an alternative to the Eurocentric approach on matters concerning Africans, Afro-descendants' history, culture, and cultural production. And before the start of, ADW, some 20, how many years now?
In 1994, we became officially a mandatory 2-semester course.
Right. So before that, students were taking classes such as, world history, world literature, so forth, and so on. And at the invitation of the history professor, Michael Gomez, colleagues from various disciplines convened and created, what is known today as, African Diaspora in the World, program. Courses offered in the program examine major themes associated with the African diaspora within a global context, and from, again, an interdisciplinary and gender-informed perspectives. The goal is twofold. The first is to make Africa and its diaspora the center of analytical inquiry, and the second, to present an understanding of historical and modern diasporas in the context of world development through time. Using diverse interdisciplinary methods of scholarly investigation, students develop a perception of themselves as citizens in an increasingly interdependent world. They also sharpen their awareness of diverse cultural and historical experiences in that world. And finally, they promote the association between learning and social change. And I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Alix. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anastasia Valecce, and I'm an associate professor of Hispanic Studies at Spelman College. Before becoming an associate professor at Spelman College in Hispanic Studies, I always say that I was born as a global citizen before becoming eventually a nerd and then a scholar, et cetera, et cetera. And I say that because for family circumstances, I grew up in the south of Italy. I'm originally Italian. I grew up bilingual in Spanish. And I always wanted to travel, which was very weird. I was the weird kiddo in my family. I'm a first generation college graduate. There were no books in my home, and so everybody was like, "Why do you want to study more? Why do I will always be that?" Which I'm very grateful for. Because it brought me exactly where I wanted to be with my students when we talk about global citizenship. And especially in the Hispanic area of studies. And before being at Spelman, I was a graduate student at Emory University, which has a very different student body. And what I like a lot about the place where I am right now is that when you teach Spanish, you're not teaching just one language. And it's very similar, I'm sure, for French or for Arabic. You're teaching, the standard Spanish, lower level to build the foundation. But then they start noticing that if they watch a Mexican film or a film from Argentina or the Caribbean, all of a sudden they don't understand the Spanish that they learned anymore. There are words that are unfamiliar and all of that. So I enjoy particularly, I would say a couple of things at least. The first one is, as my colleagues said, this idea that when you're learning a language, you're learning a culture, really. And you're not just learning one culture. You're learning all the different millions of cultures that are within that universe. The other thing is that specifically being at Spelman gave me the opportunity to kind of give my students the insight of, racial discourse and how it changes when you change geography, how colorism changes when you change geographies, how there are black people in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, in Dominican Republic, and sometimes they are surprised about it. When you bring a guest speaker from those areas, and I recently brought to Spelman a black Spanish writer, and they were like, "Oh my God, there are black people in Spain." And also I like the fact that I can offer the perspective of a person that comes not just from Italy in the stereotypical way of thinking about Italy, but I come from the south of Italy. I come from that Mediterranean that you were talking about, where immigrants die every day. I come from Puglia, the heel of the boot, that has been the passage of many migration from the east, from Africa. So it's a very hot topic in everyday news where I come from. And I like to give that perspective. I like for them to understand the Mediterranean and the similarities and the connections to the migration with Latin America, for example. I am also, so I like the fact that I can have this global vision about race, about what it means to be Black outside of the United States, how migrations really repeat patterns, and what it means to come from Europe, but also from that reality that repeat patterns in terms of migration, colorism, and racism. And I'm also, I like the fact that being at a women's college, at a black women's college, it gives me the opportunity also to explore topics such as, how, for example, in this country, the Latina body is portrayed in media, and how them as Black women can relate to that. I always like to discover with them how they get to learn more about their own culture, about their own situations, by learning about other cultures and other histories. And I think I will stop here and then we can go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Kelly Comfort. I'm also in a similar field. I'm in the School of Modern Languages at Georgia Tech, where I'm a Spanish professor. And my area of research is 19th and 20th century Latin America. That's kind of my standard area of research. But a lot of what I'm going to share now has to do more with my work in study abroad and in service learning. So I thought I'd start by saying the way I approach global citizenship or training students to be global citizens is, to say that without linguistic and cultural knowledge, you're probably not going to get there. And I really see both of those as necessary. And so, I have a lot of traditional study abroad experience. I co-directed for about 7 years our Language for Business and Technology summer program in Spain, where I led half of the program in Granada in southern Spain and taught a class on environmental and economic sustainability. I later created a semester-long program in Granada called Serve, Learn, Sustain in Spain, and that combined 2 service learning courses with 2 sustainability courses and a conversation practicum. So my students were doing at least 15 hours a week of service work in the local community, and they were looking at not just economic and environmental, but also kind of social and cultural sustainability issues. Here locally, I started our Spanish service learning class in 2007. Juan Carlos is teaching it now, I think. And also our Hispanic Community Initiative, Hispanic Community Internship course. And so I've, over the time, maybe more pre-pandemic than post-pandemic, at one point had 25 different partnerships here in Atlanta with the Latinx community. And students could work with organizations, businesses, and nonprofits. I believe in immersion, and I think immersion is the key to getting global citizenship. And so study abroad is the easiest immersion method, but not everyone can go abroad. And I don't want to be elitist in that. So when students can't go abroad because they're co-oping, because they can't afford it, because they have health issues, because they're a student athlete, etc., I think providing the local immersion in the language and the culture is really important. And that's where those service learning and internship opportunities come about. And then when the pandemic started, I started a new global at home study abroad program, is what Georgia Tech is calling it, called Salud in Spain. And it looks at issues of medicine and healthcare in the Spanish context as compared to the US. And for that, we collaborate with 7 doctors from Spain, as well as the Dean of the Medical School of the University of Granada. But students also can have the option of doing research in the area of health humanities or doing a local internship with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, the Latin American Association, or Good Samaritan Health Center. So those are all really important things. 2 other things I wanted to share in the field of global citizenship. I do frequently teach our senior capstone course, which is also required for our graduate students at Georgia Tech, which is our intercultural seminar. And I think it was similar to a lot of what Ian said at the beginning. We look at a lot of cultural comparison lenses or continuums, individualism and collectivism, universalism, particularism, things like power distance, time orientation, etc. And I think as a capstone course, that's a very effective course in having students unpack and reconsider what hopefully was a study abroad experience, and if not, at least some type of domestic immersion or global at home experience as well. So I think having immersion and reflection on that immersion is kind of the key to creating a global citizen. And I just wanted to end by mentioning that I'm taking this idea of the global in a current textbook that I'm writing, and Miguel and Natalie are collaborating on that textbook, but it's called A Global Humanities Approach to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Understanding Planet, People, and Prosperity. And for that, my research has gone way beyond Latin America. I'm looking at a Beninese, Belgian, Senegalese-based photographer, Fabrice Montero. And also we are working with a local Atlanta artist who's very much involved in the Black diaspora and in Black rights here in Atlanta, Charmaine Minifield. If you don't know her work, I recommend it. But it's a book that deals with 12 different global texts as a lens through which to kind of understand the SDGs. So that's it for me.
Hello everybody, my name is Miguel Rosas Buendia. I'm from Lima, Peru. I'm an assistant professor of Spanish and Latin American Studies at Georgia Tech. And I would like to start sharing my understanding of global citizenship, or the idea of transmitting to the students something global. And I think my main point in many of my classes is telling to the students that the phenomenon or the struggles that we are studying in Latin America, you can find them similar situations in other parts of the world. So the global response or the global aspect is understanding that the experience of many people in Latin America can be connected to others. And through that understanding, I think they can become global for the future careers. That's the way I approach this general topic. So now I would like to share some examples from my classes. I'm in a science and engineering institutions like Georgia Tech, so I teach one class that is titled Science and Technology in the Hispanic World. My research is in the history of science and technology in Latin America, and especially in the Andean region. I do research on specific sciences like geology, mining engineering, and archaeology, which allows me to do a reflection on indigenous people and how the discipline of archaeology conceptualized indigenous people, which has been always problematic, and the discipline itself is making a long reflection on the methodologies and ideas that they assume. So in this class, for example, I start by one question, and that this could be a question also for you, which is when you think about the origin of modern science or the concept of industrial revolution, what do you think? You think of England, you think of Francis Bacon, and that's what many textbooks, and that's a traditional account of the history of modern science. Yeah? England, Industrial Revolution, the same, Northern Europe, Western Northern Europe. But what we do in the field of Latin American studies in the history of science is proposing a very simple question. Spain and Portugal, they created an empire in the 15th and 16th century. The colonialist aspect, I'm going to talk about it, but for a moment there. So they created an empire, and that empire needed technology, the ships, science, data, accumulation of data, institutions to manage that information. So if you go to any university in Northern Europe, and also in the United States, to a history of science class, modern science, you're going to start the class only with England, France, Germany, Sweden. And the Hispanic world, which includes Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, it's not going to be part of the story. So from the point of view of Latin American studies in relation to history of science, we try to say first, wait, the idea of modern science and the idea of scientific revolution has a bias that is related to Northern Europe and the United States later. But the Hispanic world, Spain, Portugal, and the colonies and the territories in Latin Latin America. They have a presence in that story, in the development of modern science. Now, I said, of course, I'm not saying Viva el Rey, no, long life to the King of Spain. I'm not saying that. Of course, there are many other layers. So what else I include in the class? I include the place and the role of indigenous populations during the colonial time for creating knowledge for different sciences. One of them, in botany, for example. A lot of knowledge was produced during the colonial time in Latin America through the colonial structure. But a lot of information came from indigenous people because they know very well, of course, territory, the geography. They had great civilizations for a long period of time, and they had a knowledge on plants and many other things, geographical knowledge. That knowledge was the most important part of the knowledge that was produced in colonial Mexico or colonial Peru, if we think of the Valley of Mexico and the Andes. So when I stress to students, okay, we have another actor in the history of modern science in this period, we are saying there is a population that also produced a lot of knowledge, and even though it was a hierarchical society, of course, it was a hierarchical society at the colonial time, there is a huge participation from the point of view of indigenous knowledge in the history of modern science. Another thing that I do in classes, one of my main ideas, when I'm giving this example from my science and technology class, because I am a professor at a university that trains students in the sciences and engineering. So they usually only learn how to apply something, how to work for a corporation, how to work for a lab, and they don't have a reflection of science, the place of science in society. So my class offers, of course, an opportunity to reflect on the presence of science in the society, the idea that the sciences are not only in the lab, but they are also part of the society. They are also part of institutions that have assumptions about the population. They are going to offer something, for example, in medicine. And this is a space to reflect on the social dimension of science from the Latin American perspective. I teach another class too that is focused on, the title of the class is Environmental Humanities in Latin America. We explore different contexts, perspectives, actors in relation to the environment in the region. And one constant actor in my classes are indigenous populations. So, for example, when we think about the current climate crisis and ecological perspective to think about all this big problem, we have a lot of bibliography by scholars from the global north, of course, and there are a lot, and they are very good thinkers. But we also have indigenous intellectuals that participate in this conversation. So I offer to the students the opportunity to read these intellectuals. This semester, for example, we read Ailton Krenak, which is a Brazilian activist, leader, politician. He's very famous. Maybe if you go to YouTube and look for him, Ailton Krenak, you're going to see this famous video in which, in the Constitutional Assembly in 1987, he gave a talk to a congressman in Brazil. And while he was giving his talk, he was painting his face with a ceremonial, he was doing something ceremonial in front of the people, trying to transmit the idea of we are part of Brazil, we are people that we have never been a problem for the state, but we have been conceived always as an enemy to the state. He said that in that speech. In front of the assembly that is writing the new constitution after the dictatorship in Brazil. So offering to the students the opportunity to read an indigenous intellectual like Krenak and many others, allow them to think, okay, there are a lot of voices that are important in the US, in English-speaking context, that are offering us a great perspective on the environment and the climate crisis, but there are also these voices that are very important and teach us a lot about the problem. That's what I have to share right now. I want to add something about, I teach another class that is titled Global Latin America, and the last section is called Migrations. And in that section, for example, I teach a class on Palestinian, Arab people and Palestinian in particular, because I don't know if you know, but 20 million Latin Americans are descendants from Arab people, and especially Lebanese and Syrian, but also Palestinian. So the idea of that session, for example, is thinking, okay, Palestine is a global issue because it's a topic for reflection on human rights and citizenship, etc. So what the Latin American experience, what the Latin American Palestinian community, especially the Chilean community, can teach us about this global issue. I do the same with African diaspora and Asian immigration to Peru and Brazil, etc.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. I would like to provide a very quick comment, and I think we have a working group in the making. So we could probably get together, continue the conversation. A couple of lines of commonalities and curiosities and inspiration that I'm getting from this panel. The globe and the global, it seems to be a very abstract concept, a concept associated with abstract space. So planetary brings back that materiality, that living system kind of flavor to our situation. So I think there are a couple of things that I would like to highlight from the panel. First of all, I think there is a wonderful opportunity to think about planetary routes and planetary archives. Planetary archives is an idea from a thinker, Akinyemi, who have thought about, how we reconstruct the planetary archives, and in that way, that could also motivate epistemic, shifts. So I think planetary routes, following these cultures and following the places where we produce encounters and also disagreements and conflicts and all that, would be very productive. Another aspect that I would like to take from this panel is the importance also of thinkers that are global but have associated their thinking also to the thinking of a region. So we have Fanon, we have Malcolm X, we have Glissant. They are global thinkers, and they're thinking through problems that also involve the African diaspora. So I think bringing back those conversations is very important as well. And finally, one other opportunity that I see as I look at Atlanta, as I look at the Atlanta Global Studies Center, the place of our city as a hub for civil rights, human rights, and African diasporic traditions, is that we could provide opportunities for others moving in the direction of looking into some of these issues. Like, for example, last summer, Miguel and I spent some time in Puerto Rico, and we came across a lot of initiatives involving Afro-Puerto Rican cultures. The Mellon Foundation just supported a program of Afro-Puerto Rican studies. And I think bringing that music, bringing those traditions into our city, and also visiting and learning from what they're doing is going to be a great opportunity, not only in Puerto Rico, but also there are groups in Mexico looking at Afro-Mexican traditions. So I think there are plenty of opportunities for collaboration and synergies across our knowledges, regional knowledges. So with that, I would like to open it to the public, and we could continue the conversation. Yeah.
I want to just add one thing. Since it's connected to what you are saying, and I didn't mention anything about my classes earlier, but pre-pandemic, one way to see the effects and the benefits of this global citizenship and give students this feeling of what it means, pragmatically speaking. So in pre-pandemic time, it was 2019, I taught a course on representation of race in contemporary Cuban visual arts. And we spent with students what I called an alternative spring break, and we spent 9 days in Havana, Cuba, having workshops with the artists that we studied in class. And they were all Afro-Cuban artists from different disciplines. So we had a filmmaker, we had a painter, we had a musician, and so forth. And that really changed, even for me, in unexpected ways, the professional path of that group of 12 students. It was a very small group, and it was a life-changing experience for them. They came back, and I remember I had this one student that wanted to continue her studies in law school, and she got accepted to Columbia Law School. And nowadays she decided, because of that experience, to become, for example, an immigration lawyer. Another student that was in medical school, she wanted to be in Doctors Without Frontiers and travel in Latin America. So it really, even, they came from different disciplines, different, right? I had also a student that right now is in Middlebury, she want to be an interpreter. So that experience, even in all these different fields, had a very huge impact on students. And that, for me, is the combination of the theory of what a global citizen is and the practice of me as a professor, a college professor, and the consequences on the education and the future of our students.
Thank you so much for your presentations. Really impactful, really thought-provoking, and also really encouraging. My question is about promoting global citizenships. Making sure that in the university that we're promoting global citizenship, and how that sometimes is kind of set aside because of students' desires to simply graduate and go get a job. So how do you make global citizenship relevant at the level, for students, but also at the university level? How does the university take global citizenship as an essential component of the student's educational experience? And how do you also make this relevant for the student?
Well, at Spelman we have that unwritten rule by which you cannot graduate without having a global education experience. It's really built into the institution, and I can talk about it because, on 2 counts, I've taken students abroad, and I've, just like Anastasia, I've seen what, ADW as a course does for students. I took students to Lima, Peru, and Portugal. And in Lima, or in Peru, I should say, we visited a former plantation, that was turned into a boutique hotel. And so we had a guided tour. And several times, I saw this with my, all of our programs are co-directors. So with my co-director, the students respond to what was being said and looking at us like, and we took, some steps back saying, this is you, I'm not going to say anything. It's all, you're on. And so, basically taking to task, the guide and some of the things that were being said about the presence, of enslaved Africans, on that plantation. And then in Portugal, we're invited by a group of parliamentarians, working on minorities, and same thing, and this was broadcast, on the air. And at the end, during the Q&A, the students really had some pointed questions to those parliamentarians. in other words, and it just so happened, we didn't know that before, but in both instances, all of the students had taken, ADW, so they were able to bring, and I always tell students, if you don't get anything out of this, the program and the courses that we offer you, but see that's not just theory, but that's your lived reality, our lived reality. To me, the job is done, and I'm really, fortunate to have witnessed this on 2 occasions. And going back to the global, education, the need for students to take it, I was, until recently, and my former boss is right here, Dr. Kunde, the director of cultural orientation. And one of the things we do, and one of my tasks was to teach a seminar, preparing the students before they go abroad. So again, global, education is part and parcel. It's built into, what we do at Spelman.
So it's some very specific, practical way that we try to do it. I think simulations are great, like Model UN, Model Arab League, Model African Union, Model European Union. We have these at KSU. And funding is provided through student activity fees that all students pay. So these are not discipline specific. We have students from across disciplines who participate in this. So you have American students, international students who are taking on the roles of ambassadors from countries that maybe they've never even heard of. So they're doing research on the country, they're doing research on specific issues, and they're taking on the role of ambassadors from these countries and arguing policies that they personally may not agree on. But it allows them to see the world from a different perspective, from a different cultural and national perspective. So that's one way we do that. We also have a program that we call Year Off. We've been doing it for about 20 years, where we take a country and for the whole year, we build programming around that country. We're finishing off right now with Year of New Zealand, and the whole university is involved in it. Faculty members from different colleges are encouraged to propose programs, and it's funded. Beginning next year, we're doing Year of Senegal, and we're planning that right now. So then the next year off, I think it's moving to Europe. So faculty members propose these countries. And these programs are also integrated with classes. And it used to be at the end of this program, we have a trip to that country that consists of faculty, students, and community groups. And we try to establish partnerships with institutions in that particular country. Now, I don't know if that trip still takes place, but it is another opportunity to bring in cultures and histories and scholars and all kinds of stuff that really not necessarily celebrating that country, but educates our campus community on that country. Just the last one, study abroad. It's a great example of that, that we can also do to introduce students and also get them thinking about themes that are cross-national, the environment, migration, that are not specific to one country, but cross-national issues. I think that also creates a sense of global citizenship in students.
I think we have a chance for one more question, and then we can perhaps take, with that question, some of the comments. Yes.
Hi, I'm actually an alumnus here. I was a FLAS fellow, got to go to China for a couple months, but I'm trying to, I guess, translate that experience, the global studies experience, into a more professional, into a career path. That's kind of why I came to this panel, hopefully to drill into, like, the career competencies, what sorts of advice or anything for how to take that experience and those, I guess, that conflict, that contact, and turn that into actual, I guess, actionable career goals, as opposed to, well, just a very beneficial personal experience.
What is your field of studies, perhaps?
My field of studies, I'm in political science. My minor was international relations. No, my minor was on Chinese language and culture, and my area of concentration was international relations. Even though recently I've been mostly involved in local politics, works on a campaign, and I've been dealing with some local lobbying things, but that's more out of need versus passion.
There is a huge connection between, how we teach our students and what they can do afterwards. If we teach them in a way that they develop the most important skills that are needed in the market, which is being creative and innovative, thinking critically about certain ideas, dealing with issues on a global scale, such as climate change, inequalities, global inequalities, thinking through experiences that touch people and basically attract them to be the solution to the problems we're facing rather than continue to be the problem. So for anybody who does social sciences, political science, and other fields like that, there is tons of opportunities to put these kinds of political issues on the political agenda, starting even from local governments and going maybe into NGOs that are multinational NGOs or work around the world. So you could have tons of opportunities. Taking other types of students with other majors. For example, at Georgia Tech and other technical institutions, most of the students have technical schools, are engineers or computer engineers. And technology may be created, a lot of new technology may be created in the United States, but it ends up being used around the world. And if it's not created in a way that is thoughtful of other contexts outside of the US, it ends up being a problem. For example, when we started with the internet, decades ago, there was no other way to write except using the Latin alphabet. So people who wanted from the Arab world, for example, who wanted to write something on the internet, they started translating or transliterating the Arabic alphabet into the Latin alphabet, which changed enormously the way people actually communicated with each other. Even today, after we now, of course, can type in Arabic, but even today, a lot of people still continue to use the Latin alphabet, and this has changed the way people pronounce, certain things, or just how they communicate with each other. And so this is tremendously important. So people who are even in technical, doing technical majors, they have to be thinking about what will happen to the people who are using their technology, their new technology, or if they are in a team that creates something new, how is this going to be used? A lot of companies are multinational companies, and if you end up working in a company within the United States, it actually might employ employees who are from the outside because they are still cheaper labor. So people will have to be educated and sensitive to these global contexts and to the issues that arise for the populations which will be employed outside of the United States.
We would like to thank all the panelists, all the audience, and announce that we will have in room 341, the future of international education, and in room 342, cities and systems combating climate change and environmental justices. Thank you so much for your presence.